Could you show me on this map where your coffee producing region is?
Yeah. Here's San Cristobal de las Casas.
Uh-huh.
Up on this hill right here, this little black dot at the top there is Acteal. And around this region right here was the municipality, or is the municipality of Chenaló. So that's where I was getting coffee up until the massacre. And, you know, simultaneous with the massacre, they ran several thousand people off their land, burned their houses, and stole their coffee. So that cooperative where I was getting my coffee was basically ruined. Their coffee was stolen, you know, by paramilitaries and the army. So I was unable to buy coffee. I arrived the day after the massacre to buy coffee and was unable to. So they suggested a sister cooperative that was right next door in Panteló.
I see.
So this year I've been getting coffee from right next to there. But there's a new cooperative that's formed right in this region from 8 municipalities. They have formed, 500 producers have formed a brand new cooperative. And I'm going to buy from them because I want to help in the formation of a new indigenous coffee cooperative. You know. They were explaining to me that never in history have they been able to sell it to anybody but the coyotes, you know, or the buyers, the middlemen, and they've always got ripped off, you know, and they've tried to form a cooperative and, you know, to try to sell coffee for better prices, but the government in various forms has always thrown rocks in their road, in their words, in order so that this was never accomplished. So they just got legally organized as a cooperative now, and I'm going to be their first customer.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to start over here. Okay, I'm in Denver, Colorado on the Platte River, and I'm talking with Kerry Appel of Chiapas Coalition. The dense issues were impacting the people. Talk a little bit about that now. Why did the Zapatistas, why did that movement surface the day that NAFTA went into effect, and what's the relationship?
Well, in spite of the fact that the media and the government here just keeps referring to the struggle in Chiapas as an indigenous uprising against poverty or for better living conditions, that is true that that's an element of the uprising. But beyond that, the manipulations to the Mexican Constitution that were required for the implementation of NAFTA, the 360 changes to the Mexican Constitution, are a bigger factor in the indigenous uprising, and that's a direct connection with us here in the United States, with us as citizens. The fact that our country and our government negotiated these changes to a foreign constitution, and changed the constitutional system, the legal and the economic system, and the cultural system of a foreign country on our behalf, supposedly as citizens of the United States. And one of the key elements of these changes to the Mexican Constitution was the ending of indigenous and peasant communal land systems that are a basic tenet of those societies and those cultures.
Is that the revision of Article 27 of the Constitution?
They call it the reform of Article 27 of the Mexican Constitution.
And it basically allowed ejidos to sell off their land. Is that the essence?
Not just ejidos. Ejidos are basically state communal property in Mexico, but there's also comunidades. Comunidades, through various means, it's opening up the privatization of these land systems, which the peasants and the campesinos and the indigenous peoples don't want the privatization, and they were not consulted, or they were not in agreement with these changes to their land systems. So I feel as a U.S. citizen, I can't go along, I cannot participate in the manipulations to a foreign culture, especially to an ancient indigenous culture that has survived
the effects of occupation for 500 years now, I will not be a part of the final decimation of that culture. Because once that land is by various means taken by transnational corporations, quote, U.S. multinational transnational corporations,
yes.
That culture cannot continue to exist with the communal societies being dispersed into individual persons in rural, or not rural, but urban areas, becoming individual wage earners split up from their communities. They can't continue to have their culture, their language, and their customs and traditions. One of the most important of those traditions is their ties to the land, and they cannot have ties to the land and continue the culture if that land is taken away from them. So I feel like basically what it does in effect is outlaw indigenous cultures, and so we've been made to be a part of that. We have to either pretend like it doesn't exist, or be skeptical and say we can't do anything about it, or take a stand, but we cannot be really neutral about it because we are involved.
From what I've seen on the net, Denver has one of the most active Zapatista support communities in the country, and maintain and promote that so well.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that it's reassuring, and it's nice to hear that from somebody from Los Angeles, somebody who's not near here, because we are aware of what we do here in Denver, and we try to do the best we can, but we don't really know how it fits in with what other people are doing, or how much we're doing compared to other cities, or in the United States, or in Mexico, or other places. But it's very nice to hear that. We've been trying very hard. And how do we do it? I think what has worked out very well is Sister Antonia, who lives here, and I started this Chiapas coalition. Now, we realize that a lot of people who are activists or involved in various manners are very busy people, and they don't really need another meeting to go to every week or every month, or something else that takes up all of their time. That I think felt like we would exclude a lot of people from participation if that was the case. So the Chiapas Coalition is not really any entity at all. It does not really exist. It only comes into existence occasionally when there's a need for a fundraising event or some kind of a political action in response to something that's going on, and the rest of the time, it's not taking up people's time and everything. And I think that has resulted in people being really willing and ready, or even anxious, to wait for these times when somebody puts a call out for some kind of an action or assistance effort.
When there's something to do, not just another meeting to go to.
Yeah, and another thing I think that's really contributed to the success of it is most of our activities are not, long, boring, angry speeches that take up the whole evening, but we mix, as the Zapatistas do, words from a lot of people, in a way kind of an open mic, whereas people from different segments of the community they can participate in the evening on more of a horizontal basis, and then we mix that with celebrations, celebrations of being human, and celebrations of solidarity, and we have poetry, and we have music, and we have videos, or we have special guests that come from Chiapas or from LA or from various places who will be the main speaker or something. But it's an enjoyable evening, an empowering evening where people can mix community involvement with cultural celebrations and just multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-political, all-encompassing, empowering evening. And what has happened is people have come back to us after these events, and they've been very generous. We've raised quite a bit of money, and they've come back to us and asked, very shortly after the most recent event, when is the next event going to be? Because they want to do another one.
That's encouraging.
Yeah, and considering the fact that we all enjoy them, and they raise a significant amount of money for the refugees and for humanitarian relief, it's good to hear that people are anxiously awaiting for the next opportunity.
You were telling me a little while ago about some pressure that you want to bring on the mayor regarding some overtures he's making to Zedillo. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Our mayor here in Denver is Wellington Webb, who's, I think, a good person, and he supported the the boycott relatively recently against apartheid South Africa, and now he apparently has been convinced to invite the president of Mexico to Denver to try to sell Denver to Mexico as far as trade agreements and reciprocal trade between Denver, Colorado, and Mexico. The idea is that Houston and LA get all the attention, and we want to sell Denver. But what I object to in that is that at the current time, the president of Mexico is waging, maybe not personally, but he's certainly the head of a government that's waging a war against the indigenous peoples, and has for 5 years. There's been the development of death squads, the militarization of the country, huge increases in human rights violations that have gone on with impunity, and I think it sends a wrong message to invite that same person that's the head of those human rights, or at least in a figurative sense, to Denver to ignore those human rights violations and bring him here merely for economic profit.
In '94, you were telling me 13 or 14 trips back. That's good. Okay, I'm gonna start over here. Okay, I'm in Denver, Colorado.
Very empowering to me to be able to meet the protagonists that are involved in basically a world-changing struggle, and to get to know them on a personal basis and find out that, although they're different worlds, that they are like me and I am like them in certain ways, and that we can work together in a cooperative manner, and we can have solidarity, and we can build bridges of friendship, regardless of what the government says about borders separating people, the borders disallowing friendships or solidarity, that we can cross those borders, and we can participate in the formation, just the formation of a better world, or whatever world the future is going to be, just as the transnational corporations or the governments can try to enact their version of what they think a good world would be for them. So it's great to be able to get to know people and to build confidence with them and to participate in the construction of the future to some degree.
Okay, well, I want to talk about your enterprise, but to do that we're going to move to another locale. So shall we do that?
Let's go.
Well, Kerry, here we are at Cherry Creek Mall.
Yeah.
Major new upscale shopping center in Denver, right?
Isn't it nice?
Now, why did you suggest this as a locale to talk about coffee?
Well, I feel like all this kind of epitomizes the philosophy of our economic system, and the same economic system that is having an impact on the indigenous peoples in Chiapas right now through the North American Free Trade Agreement.
What characterizes that system, and what are you trying to present? What kind of alternatives are you trying to present? Let's get right into it.
All right, let's get right to it. These people all around you, to be quite candid, are basically all rich white people. These people are the most privileged people in the world, the most powerful people in the world, and the richest people in the world, the most affluent people in the world, who have the most of everything to enjoy. And so this represents that. I mean, we have Neiman Marcus, we have Neiman Marcus, we have Saks Fifth Avenue, we have Lord & Taylor, we have all these elite, very expensive stores here. Now, at the same time, where I go to Chiapas, Mexico, the Mayan peoples, the indigenous peoples of Chiapas, are experiencing now 5 years of low-intensity warfare against them in order to take what little they have to contribute more to the wealth of these people. And I don't think there's any justice in sacrificing the poor for the benefit of the people who are already the richest in the world. Is for the free trade agreement, the legislation has been enacted in Mexico for this trade agreement that ends the Indian land systems in Mexico and excludes them from the participation of the development and the exploitation of the resources on their former lands. They will be moved off their lands and their culture thus destroyed, so that these same transnational corporations can have the maximum benefit of the ownership and exploitation of those lands. So it's exactly true what I'm saying, that those who already have are going to exclude those who have nothing, so that these people can then exploit and develop and profit more. While in the view of the transnational corporations and the trade entities and so on, they feel like this is of benefit to the indigenous peoples of Mexico, because it's going to give them some menial jobs in urban areas in exchange for their land and their customs and their culture and their traditions. But nobody has asked the indigenous people, nobody has invited them to participate in the process of the negotiation of these trade agreements or their own future. They're objects of the decisions of Wall Street and Washington and Mexico City. And I think that it's easy enough to look around and say, there's enough profit in this process. There's enough margin of profit in this process that indigenous peoples can be included in the formulation of these policies. Their culture, their customs, and their traditions, and their future, and their participation can be taken into account. That there's plenty of room for profit for everybody involved.
On your business cards and literature, it says the Human Being Company putting human values above profit values. How do you do that? How are you trying to change the paradigm?
Well, from my research and my interviews and my observations and my analysis, to put it simply, the formula that exists now is maximum return to the shareholders. This is capitalism, where people with money invest their money in stocks and bonds, and then the corporate entities, the transnational corporations, or the businesses, whatever these groups are that the money's invested in, come right out and say that their only duty is maximum return of profit to their shareholders. That things like human rights, ecology and environment, and social factors, social justice, and so on, have no place in business. That the only factor is maximum return to the investors. After the Cold War now, the basic foreign policy of the United States is to enact or impose the U.S. economic model and social model and language on all the countries of the world, because according to so many people, capitalism and this model that the United States exemplifies has shown itself to be the natural winner and the supreme system and the only system that's viable. That's their viewpoint, and therefore they're doing the world a favor by imposing these systems on the rest of the countries. But in the case of Chiapas, it's not doing anybody a favor in Chiapas. I mean, it's not a free trade agreement that imposes itself or gives itself or lends itself to the people of Chiapas with 70,000 federal Mexican army troops, with rape and murder and massacres and illegal detentions and occupation and psychological and physical terrorism. It doesn't seem to me like that's doing anybody a favor.
When you say that the U.S. wants to impose its model on the world, there's one thing that occurs to me. The U.S. model, to me, would include things like trade unions, minimum wages, child labor laws, and a lot of protections that we've developed over the century. I don't see anyone try to impose those on third world countries, and in fact, just the opposite.
I think that viewpoint, an article by Clifford D. May, the ex-associate editor of the Rocky Mountain News, kind of summarizes the attitude about that. In this column, he's proposing that it's more important for prosperity and market economies to come to these countries first, and democracy and human rights will someday follow. And my read on that is that first, the rich people in the United States and the G7 nations get to benefit and exploit and profit on the people, and if the people go along with it willingly, someday they will have human rights, someday they will have democracies, someday the benefits of trade unions and other things that we take for granted somewhat will eventually come to these people. But to me, that's a racist attitude that says that these people aren't able to handle democracy as well as we are, that they're not on the same level, or they're not intelligent enough, or somehow they're inferior in some manner, and that their human rights and their needs aren't as important as ours are. But I want to go back to one thing real quickly before I lose it entirely. We were talking about this model of commerce that says that the only consideration is the maximum return to the investors, as in Wall Street. It seems to me that this model has a lot of serious flaws and limitations, because for one thing, if you have fair working conditions or safe working conditions or fair labor practices, it costs the company more money. So therefore that is contrary to their obligation to return more money to their investors. So any way they can cut corners is their duty, whether it's human rights, whether it's women's rights, whether it's child labor, whether it's unsafe working conditions or negative environmental factors. Those all save the company money and contribute more profits to the investors. It's almost like it's their duty to do these things, and that's why, of course, a lot of these things have moved to other nations where there's a lot of poverty, and it's easier to exploit the people and to convince officials that govern those nations to allow these kind of activities. But I don't know. It seems to me that there's room in the formula for human rights, and that you can't have a good economic situation without corresponding human rights and a good social situation and a good justice situation and a good democratic or political situation, that one cannot go without the other. And I just decided that, to the best of my ability, for my part, I would just do an experiment to see if it's possible, without setting up as a non-profit, without applying for grants, without getting assistance that wouldn't be normal business monies coming in, to operate as a for-profit company and see if you can include those values that I was talking about, human rights, and specifically in this case indigenous rights and respect for indigenous culture, women's rights, health rights, political rights, justice, equality, dignity, and all these factors in the commercial formula. It is commercial. I'm not denying that it's commercial. It's international commerce. But I think we can set another example besides the dominant capitalistic model that people claim is the only one that works. And so if these people here don't know what's going on in regard to where this clothing is produced, what the conditions are in the factories in the various countries around the world where these where all these products are produced, they can make an informed choice about how they feel about those working conditions, or whether or not they want to support the exploitations in these other countries. For instance, in Chiapas last December, 45 of our coffee producers were massacred on December 22nd. Thousands more were driven from their homes. Their homes were burned, and the Mexican army and the death squads stole all their coffee and sold it, basically destroying this indigenous cooperative and killing several of its members. Now, we were unable to buy that coffee because it was stolen by government forces and their paramilitary groups and death squads. So somebody bought that coffee. It could have been somebody here in Cherry Creek. It could have been Starbucks. It could have been Boyers. It could have been Folgers. But these people here who buy this don't know if they are contributing to death squads and massacres, or if they're contributing to environmental, ecological, and better human rights situations, because those elements aren't included in the way of doing business here. So, we think that you have to include that information about the world where these where all these products are produced. They can make an informed choice about how they feel about those working conditions, or whether or not they want to support the exploitations in these other countries. For instance, in Chiapas last December, 45 of our coffee producers were massacred on December 22nd. Thousands more were driven. That's what we're talking about when we say putting human values before profit values. It's just an experiment to see if it would work. And so far, it's working pretty well because in 2 years, we're probably 6 times the size of a company that we were 2 years ago, and we've got national attention, both on radio and on the printed media, and we've got a great response from individuals and organizations all around the country and in foreign countries saying that they've been looking for something like this for a long time and couldn't find it.